According to every reporter who was on the ground in the situation, they were saying that Maliki was willing to bend on that if the United States had been even willing to negotiate, which President Obama was not. Anyway, continue. Go ahead.
Second of all, this is kind of, that may be true to a degree, but I can tell you from I was in like several places in Iraq. The sentiment was, this is the reason why there was any modicum of stability in that country. It had nothing to do with what we did. It was because we empowered the people that were there by doing a program called Sons of Iraq. The people in Iraq knew their places, their sex a lot better. If we had not even put Maliki in power and he would have been completely sectarian, I think that country would be a hell of a lot better than it is now.
Oh, JC, no disagreement. But but while you were there, presumably, Maliki was in power, and yet the country was stabilizing anyway. So the reason the country was stabilizing...
Maliki was not in power while I was there. He was basically a shadow of anything else. The ambassador pretty much...
What do you mean he was a shadow of anything else? He's been prime minister of the country since 2006.
And what does that mean? When a country... Let me ask you this question. And I don't know if you're a veteran or not, and I don't want to denigrate you.
No, I'm not, JC, and I'm willing to openly state that, obviously. So go ahead.
But I mean, when America goes to a country and we occupy that country, for lack of a better term, we still, by all intents and purposes, ran pretty much anything with that country as far as its cultural aspects, being able to be sensitive to them, their economics. I mean, everything that could have possibly been positive about that country had to do with us being there. But that's not our responsibility to do that. I never believed in the war in the first place. I just did my duty as a soldier, and I still would do it today. But the fact remains that we can't stay in a country for 80 years. I don't believe in being isolationist.
Well, JC, let me ask you. You know, we have bases in Germany, and let me ask you about this, because we do have bases in Germany still. We have bases in South Korea. We have bases in Japan. We have bases all over the world, and those are places that we have been occupying for literally dozens and decades and decades. I appreciate that you disagreed with the war going in, and certainly I appreciate your service and your willingness to serve, because it's an amazing thing. Let me ask you, the polls tend to show that people who are in the military, who served in Iraq, believe that what is going on right now is deeply problematic, and that the sacrifices that a lot of folks made to try and ensure that this would not become a terrorist haven have now been lost. How do you feel about that?
We all knew that. Literally, we did, and I hate to say it like this, and I can tell you the looks on my soldiers' eyes when they would ask me, "What are we doing here?" They didn't know what the hell they were doing there, because I didn't know what we were doing there either. We literally tried to survive every day, basically trying to hold sides between sectarian violence that was going to happen. It was going to happen no matter what. You can't let a civil war, you can't stop a civil war from happening, my friend. It's going to happen eventually, and then someone's going to pick sides when the winter comes closer to emerging. That's just a fact of life as a fact of war, and you can see it historically. I mean,
well, JC, let me ask you this, and this is, I'm really glad you called, because it's a really interesting conversation, and you obviously have experience on the ground, which I don't, so this is really interesting. So let me ask you, yes, let's say that you're right. Let's say that a civil war was bound to break out no matter how much how much pacification we engaged in. I disagree, because obviously we were able to pacify South Korea, which had similar issues. It wasn't
pacification, though, my friend. I'm telling you, there were so many reports of people being killed and sectarian violence still happening when we had troops, I mean, all over the place embedded. Like, you can't.
Well, the violence dropped dramatically. I mean, you can't deny that. You can't deny that the violence dropped dramatically after the surge. Correct?
It did, because we had 100,000 troops or more there. If you have a police state with 100,000 police officers, there's going to be pretty low crime, but you can't maintain that. That's an impossibility. And
we hadn't maintained that. I mean, by the end of 2011, we'd drawn back the number of troops. We didn't have 100,000 troops in Iraq in 2011.
But we had something. Again, the reason why the pressure and all those things were down is because while we were there, we prevented a degree of corruption and a degree of sectarian partisanship that they had there. That is always.
So, but let me, JC, I wanted to get to kind of another question for you.
He and Sunni will never get along.
Well, okay, that's and you may be right about that. You're probably right about that. But let me ask you, JC, let me ask you one question. Do you believe that if American troops had been maintained, ISIS would now be taking over the country?
Of course, because there would be people there, but that's a no-sum game, though, because, okay, you know how much money it obviously costs just to maintain a battalion of soldiers in a country, and this is something that I'm going to say very candidly. When we deploy to countries, we do it for two reasons. We do it to secure our interests, or to be preemptive and prevent an attack someplace. Right? I can give you the point that we want to keep people from being able to stage a place for attack, but we weren't setting up oil derricks there. We weren't taking any money from that country. So if we were going there simply to get blood and treasure out of there, we got blood, but we got no treasure. So that's JC,
I disagree. And you know what?
Brothers.
There's zero evidence. There's zero evidence that we went to get treasure out of there, considering that we got no treasure and we were occupying the country. If we wanted to take the oil, we certainly could have. And JC, thank you so much for your service and thanks so much for your call. I would love to get some thoughts from some other people who served in Iraq over at 800-465-8770. 800-465-8770. I appreciate the perspective of people who have served over there and felt like it was a pointless war. They didn't want to be there in the first place. That is not what I have heard from the vast majority of soldiers to whom I have talked. The polls tend to show that most soldiers agree with what I am saying, at least people who served in Iraq. And the soldiers who are speaking out now are generally not like JC. Most of the ones who are speaking out now do not believe that what happened in Iraq was a matter of simple spending of blood and treasure for more treasure. They believe that what was happening there was a fight against Islamofascists, and that regardless of any belief that there was sectarian violence that was bound to happen in Iraq, regardless, that any amount of time we could delay that from happening was going to be a positive. Dick Cheney basically makes that case, the vice president of the United States under President Bush. He says, look, another 9/11 is coming because of stuff like this.
One of the things I worried about 12 years ago and that I worry about today is that there will be another 9/11 attack, and that the next time it'll be with weapons far deadlier than airline tickets and box cutters.
Now, Dick Cheney is going at it with Rand Paul, the senator from Kentucky. The senator from Kentucky is stating, and has stated multiple times, that he feels that this is not even on Obama. He says that this is really on President Bush and on Dick Cheney. He says that we need to stay out of there, that essentially he is his father. He believes that the United States is what created the threat against the American people. Dick Cheney went after Rand Paul pretty hard here.
Rand Paul, pointing to things like that, wrote in the Wall Street Journal also, many of those clamoring for military action now are the same people who made every false assumption imaginable about the cost, challenge, and purpose of the Iraq War. They have been wrong for so long. Why should we listen to them again? Your response?
With all due respect, John, I was a strong supporter then of going into Iraq. I'm a strong supporter now. Everybody knows what my position is. There's nothing to be argued about there. But if we spend our time debating what happened 11 or 12 years ago, we're going to miss the threat that is growing and that we do face. Rand Paul, with all due respect, is basically an isolationist. He doesn't believe we ought to be involved in that part of the world. I think it's absolutely essential.
We'll have Rand Paul's response to all of that, plus a couple of military members on the line. Stick around, we'll get to you. Ben Shapiro Show, AM 770, KTTH, KTTH.com. Our number, 800-465-8770, 800-465-8770, as we debate about what to do now that Iraq is collapsing around us. Ben Shapiro Show, AM 770, KTTH, KTTH.com. Senator Rand Paul really going at it hot and heavy with former Vice President Dick Cheney on the subject of what to do about the situation in Iraq. Dick Cheney saying, look, we have to do something here. This is a terrorist group that is taking over an entire country, and the Iranians are about to intervene. Dick Cheney being attacked in turn by Rand Paul, who is blaming basically the Bush administration and Dick Cheney for any of this happening in the first place. Here's Senator Paul.
I think there's chaos in the Middle East, and I think the chaos is because we've created a vacuum. Before the Iraq War, I think there was somewhat of a standoff between Sunni and Shiite, had been for maybe 1,000 years off and on. But now we have a chaotic situation, we have a vacuum, and I think one of the reasons why ISIS has been emboldened is because we've been arming their allies. We have been allied with ISIS in Syria. They have had a safe haven because we have been arming the rebels to keep Assad away from them, and now they go back and forth. So I think our intervention in Syria has led precisely to what's going on in Iraq.
I have seen no information that we've been directly arming ISIS in Syria, so I don't think that that's true. As far as the idea that we created a vacuum in Iraq, well, we did when we pulled out. The vacuum was not created by us deposing Saddam Hussein. The vacuum was created by us pulling out in the aftermath and then handing over the country to a terrorist group and the Iranians, alternatively. And before the break, we had on JC is a caller from Fort Lewis, ex-military. I guess he's maybe currently still in the military. He served a couple of tours of duty, 3 tours of duty, he said, in Iraq, very much anti-war. And I wanted to get some folks to call in from the military, see if they agreed with him. 800-465-8770. JC made the case that the situation in Iraq is something that the United States should stay far away from, that we only went in there for oil in the first place, and that we had not secured the country by the time we left. Don in Lakewood, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show, AM 770 KTTH. It says here you're a retired Army in Iraq twice. Thank you for your service, sir. And what do you make of the situation?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you just fine. Go for it.
Okay. Yeah, I spent my last 2 deployments to Iraq on a MIT team. And I can tell you something. I mean, Iraq it's not going to. They're not going to change overnight. I mean, we were trying to get them to trust each other. That's the biggest thing the Shiites and the Sunnis and the Kurds, the Christians had, was a matter of trusting each other. And that's what the MIT team was trying to get them to work together, get them to trust each other. The first unit I was assigned to, my MIT team was assigned to, we had them. They were a pretty good unit. They were a mixture, and they were got the point where they could trust each other, especially when it came to battle. The next group we had, I mean, they needed a lot of work. They were a border unit, but it was just a matter of getting them to trust each other. I mean, if you look at our history itself, the North didn't trust the South, and the South didn't trust the North right after the Civil War ended.
Well, Don, this is a great point. This is a great point.
World War I for that to come about, that trust to come back. And
yeah, Don, this is
really needed to do. It would have taken time.
It's a terrific point. I mean, when the United States was first founded, we had two rebellions within the course of 5 years when the United States was first founded. We had the Shays Rebellion in 1786, 1787. Then we had the Whiskey Rebellion in 1791. All of that happened right at the very beginning, and all the colonies really distrusted each other a pretty substantial amount. And this is why I find it so ridiculous when people say things like, well, we gave them their fair shot. When exactly was their fair shot? Between 2011 and now? Was their fair shot 3 years long? Because typically when a country, especially one that's as torn apart by sectarian strife as Iraq, gets a fair shot, my feeling is we should probably give them a little bit longer than 5 minutes before we pull out.
I mean, we had the Sunnis, the Shias, and the Kurds, when President Bush was in the White House and his people were in charge, they were working together, starting to trust each other, to work together to form a government. I mean, it wasn't easy, and that's why we had to mentor them. And that's what the MIT teams, the transition teams were. We were mentoring these people to trust each other and work together as a cohesive unit, because the transition teams aren't made up just one religion or one race. They're made up of all religions and all races. And we had them look at ourselves as an example. And they were trusting us. And so they saw what we're doing, and they got cohesive towards each other. But the thing is, we just flat out left them, and just everything went back to hell in a handbasket because President Obama wanted to get our troops out of Iraq to fulfill a campaign promise, and that's why we're back. That's where we're at right now.
No, Don, I appreciate your service. I appreciate the call, and thanks so much for everything that you did in Iraq and for the country. Doug in Tacoma, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show, AM 770 KTTH. You're retired Air Force. What do you make of the whole situation, Doug?
Well, I don't agree with either Senator Paul or former Vice President Cheney. I do agree with some of the comments that your previous callers have made. If you go back into the history of that country, it was first called Mesopotamia. It was ruled by the Turks, who would, over the course of time, encounter the same violence. At the end of World War I, the Brits took over. The Brits had the same problems. It was Winston Churchill who thought they could govern the country with armored tanks and aircraft. And that existed until about the time that Saddam Hussein, a thug, took over with the Ba'ath Party. We stepped in, and the first thing we did was to say if anybody was linked with the Ba'ath, they were no longer qualified to serve, and we gutted their entire infrastructure politically.